the opportunity to turn that over to the speaker to present the affiliations from which they come. So I will at this point turn it over.
Thank you, Sander. Yes, my name is Oliver Gerland. I'm an associate professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder in the Department of Theater and Dance. I knew Gerard at Stanford when I was a graduate student there in drama and the humanities. And I came across this play, Rabinal, Achí, which I'm going to speak to you about today. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so. It is arguably the original Aboriginal American drama. And reading it, I could not help but see these connections to Girardian theory. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to explore them here today with you and to share knowledge of this work, which I think is not well known. So let me see if I can make this work. All right, so my talk is about the post-classical Maya dance drama known as the Rabinal Achí. In English, Rabinal Achí translates to the man of Rabinal, where the Achí, or man, is a male warrior, and Rabinal refers to the town in the highlands of Guatemala where the action takes place and where the piece continues to be performed. Experts agree that the Rabinal Achí likely originated in the 1400s, prior to the conquest, and that it was performed periodically by Maya people under Spanish authorities for centuries thereafter, before the text we have today was written down in the 1850s. Despite this long history of transmission under colonial rule, the text presents a strikingly intact Maya cosmos. French scholar Alain Breton writes, "The text suffers from no European influence. Not one word, not one phrase, not the slightest allusion betrays the presence of an intervention on the path of Hispanization or Christian conversion. All evidence suggests that it was already, at the moment of its passing into alphabetical writing, a contained tale, closed unto itself." Breton's claim has sparked objections, for how can an indigenous work survive 300 years of public performance under Spanish Christian rule without some changes in story, characters, discourses, and so on? And yet, the Rabinal Achí really does seem like a time capsule of the Maya. Against a background of warfare among Maya peoples, a Quechua warrior captured by a warrior from the town of Rabinal refuses to bow before the Rabinal chief and is sentenced to die for his crimes against the Rabinal people. At the end, the Quechua warrior commands his own human sacrifice at the hands of the eagle and jaguar warriors who guard the Rabinal chief. "And you eagles, you jaguars, come now, do what must be done, but let your teeth, your claws, kill me quickly, because I am a great warrior who comes from my mountains, my valleys. Heaven and earth be with all of you, O eagles, O jaguars." And then the stage direction, the eagles and the jaguars encircle Quechua warrior, stretching him out on the sacrificial stone in order to open his breast. After his death, all the actors dance in a circle. As far as I know, René Girard was not acquainted with the Rabinal Achí, nor has the work been discussed by scholars of mimetic theory. I am excited to start that conversation with you today, and what a great place to do it, just steps from the Templo Mayor, where enemy warriors like the one in the Rabinal Achí met their end on a sacrificial stone. The Rabinal Achí unfolds in 4 scenes and features 3 main characters: the Rabinal ruler, Chief Five Rain, his son, the Rabinal warrior, and his enemy, Quechua warrior of the forest people. In this picture from a recent performance, note the visual similarities between the Quechua warrior, who is on the left, and the Rabinal warrior on the right. Clearly, these seem to be what Girard would call twins or doubles. Despite the title, Quechua warrior is the protagonist of the Rabinal Achí. Not only does he get the first, last, and most lines, but he also undergoes the most change over the course of the action. This chart shows what I'll call the character journey of Quechua warrior, and it's a good way to synopsize the action. In scene 1, so at the top you can see the scenes. I invented a little 5 there. It's actually 4 scenes, but something strange happens at that point, which I'll discuss. And then I'll call these statuses. And I put an asterisk by the god there, and we can talk about that later if you're interested. But here we go. We're just going to kind of move from left to right. In scene 1, we meet Kece warrior as a combatant engaged in individual battle with the Rabinal warrior outside the Rabinal fortress. He shouts threats at Chief 5 Rain, who is inside the fortress, and is answered by the Rabinal warrior, who then captures him. At this point, the Kece warrior becomes a captive. The Rabinal warrior conducts a long interrogation that reveals the Kece warrior to be a criminal with a history of misdeeds against the Rabinal people. He should behave like a brother to the Rabinal warrior. Indeed, in the past, they fought together against a common enemy. But the Kece warrior has turned against their affiliation. He imitated the sounds of wild animals outside the fortress and lured Rabinal warriors into an ambush. He stirred revolt amongst people subject to Rabinal authority, and he kidnapped the Rabinal governor, Chief 5 Rain, and held him prisoner until the Rabinal warrior rescued him. His transgressions against Rabinal exposed, the Kece warrior appeals to be treated as a comrade. Could we not proceed agreeably and honestly as brothers, he asks the Rabinal warrior, offering to give gold and silver and to serve him and his family. The Rabinal warrior resists, but promises to present the offer of fealty. Thank you so much. The offer of fealty to Chief 5 Rain. The action shifts place, and in scene 2, the Rabinal warrior tells Chief 5 Rain that Kece warrior has requested to join the Rabinal people. Surprisingly, the chief does not reject this possibility out of hand, remarking that the Kece warrior could even become his son-in-law. Chief 5 Rain has a daughter, and perhaps the Kece warrior, this valiant one, perhaps this stalwart, intends to be the first to see her lips, her face. Perhaps he came to dance with her. Perhaps this valiant one came in order to become the clan's son-in-law, brother-in-law of the clan, in the vast walls, in the vast fortress. Let us see then if he is obedient, if he is modest, if he humbles himself, if he bows his face on entering. The chief makes quite an offer. If Kece warrior can bow his face upon entering the fortress, then not only can he save his life and be included in the Rabinal clan, he also could become a son-in-law to the chief and brother-in-law to the Rabinal warrior. Demonstrating his own obedience, the Rabinal warrior lays down his weapons before his father. Chief 5 Rain asks him to take them up again, and the Rabinal warrior then leaves the fortress to take the chief's offer to his captive. Scene 3 takes place outside the fortress, where the Rabinal warrior presents the chief's offer to the Kece warrior along with its single condition: I come to warn you that you should bow down, that you should kneel when you enter the presence of my governor, my ruler, the grandfather, the Chief 5 Rain. The Kece warrior responds, Come, come, would I be a hero? Would I be a stalwart if I were to humble myself, if I bowed my head? Here you will see how I will humble myself. Here with my arrow, here with my shield. This is how I will bow when I enter the gates of the fortress of the great palace. After this outburst, so we're here at this outburst section, Kece warrior lunges at Rabinal warrior and must be restrained. Scene 4 takes place inside the fortress, where the Kece warrior confronts Chief 5 Rain. Knowing that the only way to save his life is to humble himself, Kece warrior just cannot do it. I am the valiant one, I am the warrior, and if I must humble myself, bow my head and bend my knee, then this is what I will humble myself with. Here is my arrow, here is my shield, with which I will destroy your splendor and your glory, with which I will strike your mouth and your lips. This is how you will be tested, mighty chief. After this second outburst, the Kece warrior lunges at the chief and again must be restrained. Chief 5 Rain then lists the Kece warrior's many crimes against the Rabinal people and concludes, You will pay for these misdeeds here between heaven and earth. You have said your last goodbye to your mountains, to your valleys, because here you will die. You will perish under heaven, above earth. And then an interesting thing happens in the Kece warrior's character journey. It splits. So I'm trying to show that split after the outburst here on the chart. On the one hand, Kece warrior becomes a condemned criminal who, having transgressed against the Rabinal people and threatened the life of their chief, spends the rest of the drama preparing for execution. On the other hand, his preparations for execution involve him becoming a quasi-chief. He asks to borrow items reserved for Chief Five Rain as supreme symbols of my death, my end. The chief grants permission, and the Keche warrior consumes special foods that are given to the chief. He wears the chief's robe. He dances with the chief's daughter, exactly as he would if he had been the son-in-law. And he engages in a mock battle with the eagle and jaguar warriors who serve as the chief's bodyguards. Keche warrior then asks permission to leave the fortress and visit his homeland. Chief Five Rain, grant me if you can 13 times 20 days, 13 times 20 nights, to say one last goodbye to the face of my mountains, to the face of my valleys where I used to live. Chief Five Rain does not give permission for this trip. Indeed, he does not answer at all. From this point to the end of the drama, only the Keche warrior speaks. And so that's what I'm identifying as number 5 here. Despite being a condemned criminal preparing for execution, the Keche warrior, not Chief Rain, is in control of the dramatic action. He performs a dance indicating that he has left the Rabinal fortress and gone to his homeland. Upon return to Rabinal, he tells the chief, I had not departed, I went only to say goodbye to the vision of my mountains, to the image of my valleys. At the very end of the play, these two lines of character development, Keche warrior as condemned criminal, Keche warrior as quasi-chief, converge in a single moment of collective violence. It is both an execution and a sacrifice. The Keche warrior calls the eagle and jaguar warriors to carry out Chief Five Rain's sentence of death by killing him on the sacrificial stone. O eagles, O jaguars, and they stretch him out on the sacrificial stone to take out his heart. That's a synopsis of the Rabinal Achí, so I'll spend my remaining time pointing out some connections to mimetic theory through Gerard's readings of Sophocles' Oedipus the King. First, consider the role that prideful aggression, what the ancient Greeks called hubris, plays in Oedipus and in the Rabinal Achí. Keche warrior responds with hubris when told he must submit to Chief Five Rain. He refuses to bow his head and lashes out with physical violence. Oedipus engages in similar behavior in his fatal encounter with Laius at the crossroads and in his angry verbal exchanges with Creon and Tiresias. As conventionally construed, hubris is seen as a character trait, a noble individual quality that becomes a tragic flaw. By contrast, Gerard views hubris as part of a system of violent reciprocity that circulates through multiple characters. He points to Sophocles' use of sticomythia, alternating short lines of insults and accusations that correspond to the exchange of blows between warriors locked in single combat. Because Creon and Tiresias engage in sticomythic exchanges with Oedipus, all three act with hubris. Gerard writes, it seems arbitrary to relegate to Oedipus as a distinctive character trait, an attribute shared equally by them all. The Rabinal Achí also sets hubris inside a system of reciprocity, though the technique used to represent it verbally is very different from that in Oedipus the King. Rather than short, sharp, angry exchanges, characters repeat at length what their interlocutor has just said. Verbal exchanges follow a characteristic 5-part pattern. First, a formal salutation, "Ah, valiant warrior, man of the COV&R." Next, an introduction of repetition, "Is it thus that your voice spoke?" Then a repetition of the interlocutor's previous speech, then the reply to the interlocutor's previous speech, and then finally a courteous leave-taking, as in, "Heaven and earth be with thee." This dialogic convention produces two major effects. First, to use a Gerardian term, it undifferentiates the characters. This effect is very strong during the long interrogation in Scene 1, where Rabinal warrior quotes Keche warrior and vice versa at such length that it becomes difficult to track who said what when. A second effect is to slow the action. As one commentator remarks, such repetitions lengthen the speeches without adding much new information. I would put it another way. The formal courtesies and lengthy repetitions prevent an escalation to anger, aggression, and violence as happens in Oedipus the King. Repetitions in Rabinal Achí create a sense of reciprocity, but without violence. The few moments of physical violence in the drama, therefore, really stand out. The outbursts of the Keche warrior that function as pivots in his character journey, and of course his sacrifice at the end. In The Scapegoat, Gerard argues that myths are encoded persecution texts that point back to an actual historical collective murder. He demonstrates that Oedipus the king is such a myth, indeed a paradigmatic one. To make his point, Gerard identifies 4 signs or stereotypes of a persecution text and shows that Oedipus the king contains each of them. First is a social and cultural crisis that results in a generalized loss of social and cultural distinctions or differences. For example, in Oedipus the king, the plague that afflicts Thebes. The second stereotype are crimes that eliminate social and cultural differences, such as Oedipus's parricide and incest. The third stereotype is a criminal who bears the marks of a victim. For example, the swollen feet that give Oedipus his name and that today we identify as a disability. And fourth, violence, or as in Oedipus the king, also expulsion from the community. Like Oedipus the king, the Rabinal Achí meets all 4 stereotypes of a text of persecution. First stereotype, social and cultural crisis that results in a generalized loss of differences. This generalized loss of differences is often coded as a confusion of items normally held apart. For example, a flood which blurs the line between land and water, or a plague which blurs the line between life and death. Another sign of social and cultural crisis, Gerard observes, is when day and night are confused. This kind of confusion is referenced in the Rabinal Achí when the Rabinal warrior states that his captive, that is to say the K'che warrior, fought us for 13 times 20 days, 13 times 20 nights, so that our sleep was without rest or repose. A different translation names the K'che warrior, he who is the dream from which we cannot awaken. For 13 times 20 days and nights, the length of a year according to the Maya ritual calendar, the people of Rabinal have occupied a liminal space. They have not rested while they slept, nor have they awakened from their dreams, even during the day. Day versus night and dream versus reality have been confused for an entire ritual year. The second stereotype of persecution texts are crimes that eliminate important social and cultural distinctions. The Rabinal Achí is full of such crimes, all committed by the K'che warrior. Some are reported, as when he ambushed Rabinal warriors or kidnapped Chief Five Rain. In the former case, the Rabinal warriors who should be inside the fortress are drawn across the line and lured out of it. And in the latter, the person at the top of the Rabinal hierarchy was laid low. Indeed, the line is, he was buried behind the lime, the stone. But the Rabinal Achí also enacts crimes, or at least actions, that transgress important social and cultural distinctions. Chief Five Rain should be treated with obedience and respect, especially inside his fortress, but the K'che warrior threatens his life and physically attacks him. He is a former ally, now turned foe. The third stereotype of a persecution text is a criminal who bears the marks of a victim. By marks of a victim, Gerard means signs that the individual is a marginal member of the community, like people with disabilities or social, ethnic, or religious minorities, young children, and strangers. The K'che warrior bears victim signs as an outsider, a foreign combatant, but also as the quintessential insider, the chief. Gerard observes that rich and powerful people, like the poor and outcast, are marginal figures who, during times of crisis, can become victims of mob violence. Yes, rich and powerful people can become victims of mob violence. Borrowing Chief Five Rain's food, drink, mantle, daughter, and bodyguards as preparation for execution, K'che warrior is marked with a chief's insider marginality. At the same time, he is marked with a foreign criminal's outsider marginality. The fourth stereotype is violence, especially collective violence against the victim, marked criminal, held to be responsible for eliminating the differences that constitute social and cultural order. Such violence is clearly visible in the execution/sacrifice of K'che warrior at the end of the play. 2 quick observations about this collective violence. First, it is self-directed. K'che warrior orders his own sacrifice. In a sense, Chief Five Rain is not responsible for K'che warrior's death because he calls it upon himself. Do what must be done is one of the K'che warrior's last words. Second, the collective violence is self-evident. Gerard worked hard over many years to decipher Oedipus the king and other Greek tragedies. The Rabinal Achí presents collective violence against a marginalized human victim as an accepted social and cultural fact. It requires very little deciphering. the Rabinal Achí practically reads itself as a Girardian interpretation of myth. And then my last is just to say that the primary point of my presentation is simply to let people know about the Rabinal Achí because it's not well known. And I think it is a very well-suited text for exploring mimetic theory in a Mesoamerican context. Like Oedipus the King, it shows a society resolving a social and cultural crisis marked by undifferentiation and violent reciprocity through the human sacrifice of a person identified as a criminal who also bears the marks of a victim. That's it. Thank you.
And I again will allow Marcos the honor of presenting his own affiliations and saying that he is from and happy to welcome him to the conference.
Okay, thank you very much. Marco Stucchi, PhD in philosophy and member of a Girardian group based in Milan, Italy. And my talk today will be related to the research activity of our group since we have been studying Boccacio in 2022 and 2023. So I looked for a topic that was related to this year COV&R general topic. It is the crisis of representation. And I came up with this idea. So from representation to reality, Shakespeare's Hermione and Boccacio's Griselda. So this idea, unfortunately, brings me and you to the highest level, highest peaks of the artistic and also philosophical, I would say, production of two of the most, the biggest genius in the Western culture and in early modernity, that are Shakespeare and Boccaccio. So please have mercy if my talk will not be able to deal with such a complex matter. Actually, I will not claim to solve the problem of how we pass from a representation to a reality. I just want to share some consideration and maybe have a nice discussion with you. So I guess and I hope we all remember the main points of Girard's interpretation of the Winter's Tale by Shakespeare, because I don't have time to sum up the Winter Tale. Girard's interpretation is basically this. Leonte, king of Sicily, is possessed by mimetic desire. He wants to provoke desires of others, of people around him, and in particular he wants his wife love his friends, his best friend Polixenes. Okay, so he wants to provoke others' desire, even if those desire would be dangerous for himself. And then he becomes jealous for no reason at all, according to Girard, of his wife, and his sentences he got very crazy. He sentences to death his own newborn daughter Perdita, and Hermione, his wife, the queen, dies for pain and sorrow. But after 15 years, Leonte gives up bad mimetic desire, renouncing to mimetic rivalries with Florizel. Basically, Leonte meets Florizel, who is Polixenes' son, and Perdita, his own daughter, and he gives up mimetic desire. So he experiences what Girard here in the text on Shakespeare, of course, calls a creative conversion. And in the scene of the statue that I hope you can remember, we are all in front of Hermione's statue, and this statue turned out to be Hermione herself. Okay. Not a statue, but the person. So of course, I believe that Girard had many convincing interpretations on Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Midsummer Night Lovers, Romeo and Juliet. They are so compelling and sounding, but I think Winter's Tale's interpretation by Girard is not so convincing. Why? I believe that because according to Girard, there is a necessary connection between mimetic desire, that is basically human desire, and rivalry, conflict, violence, and death. Of course, there are some exceptions. Professor Goodhart were talking about there are some exceptions, but usually Girard thinks there is a necessary connection between desire, mimetic desire, and violence and death. But in The Winter's Tale, Shakespeare tries at least to show a possible way off this spiral, an alternative to it. According to Girard, in Winter's Tale, there is a character, a special character, who is Hermione. Hermione is a character she has a mediation. I quote: her mediation is pure and innocent, and it is neither internal nor external. She is endowed, writes Girard, with good sense. That is, I think, a strange concept for mimetic theory. It's not very clear what is good sense according to mimetic theory. So I'm wondering where this kind of mediation comes from, and even more important, what is the connection between this exemplary attitude showed by Hermione and the scene of the resurrection? Okay, are they two separated miracles, or there is a link? And in general, how many miracles are we facing in the Winter Tales? There is, according to Girard, there is just Leonte's conversion. There are no other miracles. But I would say there is also Hermione's pure and innocent mediation, seems a miracle, and her resurrection. According to Girard, we have just the Leonte's resurrection. Hermione's resurrection is just a kind of cruel joke orchestrated by Paulina. Okay. So what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes, I would like to make some comments on the scene of the statue, Act 5, Scene 3. Highlight some possible solutions to the problems above mentioned, and then I will compare Winter Tale with Boccacio's Decameron last novel, that is the tale of Griselda. So, said this here topic is the crisis of representation, and I ask myself when a representation is in crisis. I would say that a representation is in crisis when it doesn't represent anymore. Okay, it loses its meaning. Okay, it's meaningless. But here we will deal with with a different case in which a representation entered in crisis because it stopped to be a representation at all. The representation becomes the thing representing. So the statue of Hermione becomes Hermione. But before we ask ourselves how a representation comes to an object or a person, we will examine the other way around. So how happened that Hermione became a statue? So a person became a representation. So Hermione was condemned by her beloved husband Leontes, who is considered in the Winter Tales by everyone the only responsible for his terrible actions. Okay, he sentences to death his own daughter. Anyway, it is interesting, and Girard didn't comment on that nobody risked his life to save Perdita or Hermione. At a certain point, even Paulina, who is the most inflexible advocate for Hermione, suggests to forget Hermione, to do not think anymore about Hermione. So it seems, one could say that in order to become a perfect queen, loved by everybody, Hermione had to die. She had to transform herself into a simulacrum, into an image, a representation. And actually, Girard brilliantly points out why a representation is better than an object. He writes in the text in the book on Shakespeare, images and signs, and a representation I add, cannot disappoint to the extent that real objects do. Images and signs does acquire a paradoxical superiority over the objects for which they stand. Thanks to images, objects thus interdicted can be enjoyed indirectly, vicariously, and sacrificially. He also writes, the statue as statue is the equivalent of the hard-hearted adamant toward which all the Midsummer Night Lovers instinctively gravitate. Okay, so representation do not fail like objects, or at least they fail less, they fail less in satisfying our desire, because they are unsubstantial. Girard uses this word in the book on Shakespeare. It's an interesting word. They are unsubstantial representation, and they can be reproduced infinitely, okay, and indefinitely. So a simulacrum cannot fail in keeping sticked to itself a desire or a group of desire. And I believe we could say that according to mimetic theory, I mean, we can rephrase the scapegoat mechanism in these terms. The victim can establish a society that is a group of human and a group of desires, because it offers a desire that cannot be contested by no one. But actually, according to Girard, this is just an illusion, a lie. The victim has not become the god of desire. It's just a victim, a corpse. Okay. So we have ended up with desertification.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this, but I will not talk about this. So we have seen how a person can become a representation, a simulacrum. Now, the other way around. How is it possible for an object, for a representation to turn into an object or a subject? This is the difficult part. Okay, so here I have figured out 3 possible alternatives. Maybe there are more. The first one is that desire and faith are enough to make an object or someone live again, resuscitate. So if Leonte desires that to have back his wife, and he has faith that this can happen, it's okay. Hermione can resuscitate. I would call it idealistic view, because the subject, the spirit, can create out of nothing something different from itself. The second alternative is that God is omnipotent, so he can resurrect things as he likes. We need no further explanation. This I would call it an irrationalistic view. Then there is the third alternative that, according to me, is the most interesting, but maybe there are other, of course, there are other. According to this view, an object or a subject can turn into a representation and again turn into an object, so from a representation to an object, because human desire nor human violence cannot annihilate the object. So human desire and human violence cannot operate this ontological operation. But according to this view, objects exist independently from our desire. And so Girard was wrong about this point. But criticism like by Giuseppe Fornari about this point might be right. So, please, Boccacio, help us, miserere nobis, have mercy and help us. a little spoiler, Boccaccio will not help us, but maybe he could, but I'm not enough intelligent to understand how he could help us. But why I chose to talk about Giovanni Boccaccio, the Italian writer from the 14th centuries, because he was notoriously a relevant source for authors like Shakespeare and Cervantes. So we all know that Girard came up, formulated mimetic theory, also thanks to these authors, to Cervantes and Shakespeare and many others. So studying Boccaccio might be interesting for mimetic theorists and for mimetic theory. In particular here, I am interested in the last short story of the Boccaccio's masterpiece, the Decameron. That is the tale of Griselda. This tale is very plausible, a direct or an indirect source for the Winter Tales by Shakespeare. But we will not see this slide. It's not so important anyway. I just want to make a quick summarize the novel of Boccaccio. So in this novel, there is a noble, Gualtieri, who is not interested in marriage. He doesn't want to be married. But his people, his court, convince him to marry, to take a wife. So he chooses a poor girl, Griselda, and they marry each other, and they have two children, a son and a daughter. But then Gualtieri started to prove Griselda's fidelity. He wants to be sure that she is the right woman and that she loves him, will love him forever anyway, no matter what he can do. And Gualtieri takes away the son and the daughter from Griselda. Okay, he let Griselda think that he killed their son and their daughter, and after some years, he also divorced from Griselda. He pushed away her back to her little town. After 12 years, Gualtieri makes everybody believe that he chooses another girl, another woman to marry. And he brings his daughter, the daughter that he stripped away from Griselda. He will be back. Nobody knows she is his daughter. He wants that everybody thinks that she's going to marry that young girl. Gualtieri also asked Griselda to come back to assist the marriage as a maidservant, okay, as a servant in the house. And at a certain point in the ceremony, Gualtieri asked Griselda what she thinks about his new wife, his new woman. And at this point, Griselda shows no envy and no hate. She praises the girl, and she asked to Gualtieri for a better treatment for her. Okay, so it's a kind of weird story. I of course I have ruined it by telling like this, and I hope you can read it. There are a few pages. So then Gualtieri, the story is not finished, sorry, because then Gualtieri at the end tell Griselda she is the girl is her daughter, and so nobody has died. There is a great reconciliation. Everyone is happy, and so it's a weird story. We have a common pattern between the Winter's Tale and the tale of the Winter's Tale and the tale of Griselda. There is a wife tormented by her husband with no reason. There are two sons, one son, one daughter, apparently lost because of the craziness, the crazy husband. And there is a final movie scene of reconciliation, of resurrection, one might say. So in conclusion, I would like to highlight 2 points that maybe, if developed, shall bring us to a better comprehension of the problem above mentioned. So the first point is this one. Both the protagonist, Leonte, and Gualtieri seems to be the only responsible for their violence. Their people, the court, blame them, but they do not interfere with violence. They accept the results of their violence. Nonetheless, the two protagonists, at a certain point, regret their violent actions and they change their attitude toward the object of their love, so Hermione and Griselda. So the two protagonists decide to torment their wives, and at a certain point they stop to do it. And I think this fact could raise some interesting questions about Girard's interpretation of the Book of Job, because some scholars thought that Gualtieri is an allegory for God and Griselda is the believer or the church. Okay, so Boccaccio and maybe Shakespeare, despite their clear awareness of scapegoat mechanism, would likely have a different opinion from Girard about the first passages of the Book of Job. And that's a first problem. What this problem has to do with the topic of my talk, from representation to an object. It's a very indirect connection, but maybe solving these problems could help us in understanding how simulacrum is created. So according to Girard, there is just a destructive violence that annihilates the object, and there is a collective die. But maybe it is more complex than this. Maybe the object, the body of the victim, is not destroyed, but transformed. No, now I know this is kind of heresy, or to say, but moreover, are we sure that God, the Christian God, has such a univocal role in the evolution of scapegoat mechanism? Because probably Boccaccio and Shakespeare would have a different opinion. So the second point I want to highlight, and then I conclude, is that I have this intuition by comparing these two texts, so the Winter's Tales and the Tale of Griselda, because in both texts the reconciliation happened in the form of resurrection, and this reconciliation takes place in a family relationships. So there is the husband and the wife, the mother and the daughter, the father, Leontes, and the daughter, Perdita. According to Girard, we all know that family relationships have not special meaning, a special function per se. They are just more or less mimetic. And I'm not sure that Boccaccio and Shakespeare, maybe even the Gospel, would agree on this. Because the fact that Jesus did not pop up from out of nothing, but God needed a woman to say yes, to give birth to God. This fact has a meaning. Again, maybe to reach a better comprehension, a good answer to this question, maybe can help us in understanding how we produce cultures that are nothing else than systems of representation, and how this system of representations can retrospectively change us as a human being. So, thank you.
So you're already invited to, so go ahead.
Thanks so much, Sander. I teach theology at St. Louis University, and I also read fiction. So I found myself in a Ferrante frenzy about 2 years ago, and I gave a longer version of this paper at a workshop in Dublin last spring, and not many people knew Gerard there. So the long version is coming out in a volume, I think later this year. So this is the Quartet written by Elena Ferrante, and it traces the friendship of two girls from Naples, starting with their girlhood all the way through mature adulthood. These slides are of Naples. The quartet tells also the story of modern Italy, beginning with an almost medieval setting in the 1950s to all the way up to the 21st century. It ends, the last political event it relates to is 9/11. And so before just relating the events of the novels, a few words can be said about Ferrante, the author. Ferrante has been writing fiction for almost 2 decades, had been writing fiction before the quartet appeared, over the course of a creative flurry between 2011 and 2015. It has been compared to Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle and has drawn attention of both Hollywood and the literary world. So there's an essay in the New Yorker by Joshua Rothman called Knausgaard or Ferrante from 2019. Let's see if I can, so this is, so you can watch it on HBO with subtitles. The story of the quartet. It's a kind of mini series. It's very well done. So, other than being from Naples and possibly working in an Italian publishing house, little is known about Ferrante. Some of her books have been made into movies, but one might call the quartet her crowning achievement. The 4 novels are both intensely personal, revolving around episodes like Lost Dolls, classroom triumphs, and student newspaper articles, but also robustly political, where the characters in the neighborhood find themselves subject to brutal political forces, fascism, the mob, violent leftism, and within those claiming to uphold democratic norms, extreme corruption as the neighborhood emerges from the afterglow of Mussolini's rule. There's no clock in here. I forgot to start my timer, but I'll make sure that we get in underneath and beat everyone else to the line for coffee. Coursing through the 4 novels is an unnamed secularizing force where church and family play almost no role in forming the central characters. So you think of church and family as these real bedrock institutions, and the church is almost ignored, but she's viciously critical of the family. So the setting for these novels is a poor working class neighborhood, a kind of ghetto, so suffocating that its inhabitants can live more than half their childhood before realizing they can actually just walk to the beautiful Tyrrhenian Sea. So that this neighborhood is a real ghetto. Let's see, you see the sea pictures there. And at the center are 2 characters, the narrator, Elena Greco, and her best friend, Lila Cerullo. So Elena is the oldest child of a porter, Lila, the second child of a shoemaker, whose older brother, Reno, apprentices at the shop, and he really dreams of something greater. Another 5 or 6 families whose children are roughly the same age also inhabit the 4 novels. Almost all of the sexual relations and marriages happen within this collection of families, and almost every marriage and friendship ends up estranged. Lila, so the best friend, is the brilliant friend of the first novel, but her intelligence is less domesticated than Elena's. Moreover, her family, Lila's family, declines to support her intellectual promise, despite pleading from the elementary school teacher. The differing family dispositions explain why Elena, the docile teacher's pet, pursues further studies, while Lila comes to marry the neighborhood grocer, whose physical abuse of her begins actually on the night of their marriage. So for Elena, education equals escape. She attends secondary school outside the neighborhood and, against all expectations, receives a scholarship to study classics at the University of Pisa. So all the other kids from her neighborhood drop out of school when they're 11. In the midst of flailing through her thesis, she composes a short story inspired by Lila's childhood story called The Blue Fairy. And so she writes The Blue Fairy in part because they get Little Women as a book that they're allowed to buy for a certain reason that'll pop up later. And so it's just a copy of a copy, so to speak. It's all imitation. And so Elena's failing her thesis. She writes this novelette, and gives it to her future mother-in-law, who has connections in the publishing world. And the novel becomes a sensation and launches her literary career, which continues throughout the quartet. Lila, meanwhile, leaves her abusive husband for a torrid affair with Nino Sarratore, who was Elena's girlhood crush. Nino is this politically ambitious, pseudo-intellectual, and he eventually ends up in elected office. Eventually, the affair with Lila ends, and rather than return to her husband, she works in a meat packing plant under bleak conditions. Another boy from childhood, Enzo, pledges his loyalty to her with no promise of sexual return or reciprocation, and they make do in near poverty studying computer science at night. Eventually, this study pays off, and they start a company that allows them to return to the neighborhood and be a kind of economic counterbalance to the mob. Her father, the shoemaker, was poor yet outside of the reach of the local mob, at least until his son and son-in-law went to business with the dreaded Solaras, who are the kind of control the neighborhood. Now, Lila and Enzo, with a computer company and Savvy, also lie outside the grip of this kind of mob family. So violence is everywhere. And around the same time that this happens, Elena destroys her marriage to a decent but inattentive intellectual named Pietro by having an affair with the same Nino Sarratore, who everyone but Elena can see as a cad. These decisions force Elena to move back from northern Italy to Naples, and indeed to the same apartment complex as Lila. They raise their children together. Elena's 3 daughters from 2 different men, and Lila's 2 children from 2 different men. And one day, Elena's daughter mysteriously disappears. So this is the last novel, The Story of the Lost Child, and causing her always fragile mental constitution to come undone. She wanders the cities of Naples, and she is sort of fascinated by this violent history of the city. But the intimacy between the friends is almost like an accordion. They grow close, they grow apart, and near the end of the 4th book, the narrator recounts 9/11 as though the ever-present violence in her neighborhood of Naples now has spread to the entire globe. She is a mother who has placed work and her own desires over her family and children, who now resent her. Meanwhile, almost every old friend from the neighborhood has died from a drug overdose or suffered a violent death. The quartet is, in short, incestuous, as the neighborhood is a little world. René Girard, the key subject of this volume, spent much time reflecting on another little world, that of Marcel Proust's Cambrai. Of it, he writes, I think I may have it here. It's another quote. But to understand relationships of belonging and what is happening to them in today's world, we need to turn not to the social sciences, which understand nothing of conflictual mimesis, but to the true specialists in human relations, those who stage and portray them, in other words, playwrights and novelists, but only the best ones. So it's my suggestion that Ferrante is such a novelist. So in the longer version, there's three themes: foundational violence, mediated desire, and authorship and unreliable narration, which is connected to Gerard's idea of romantic deceit. So I'm going to skip the first two for the sake of time and just go to the third one, which is unreliable narration. So the thought of a memoir to be usually begins by imagining it as the printed version of so many conversations and recollections in our head, when our motives are always better than what they seem, and the other person is always the cause of the problem. See, for instance, Mary Carr's The Art of Memoir, for the need of good memoir to move past this kind of score settling. The 1.0 version of our life sounds like an attorney's closing argument to the jury and expresses a variation on Gerard's idea of the deceived romantic hero. Compared to the novelistic approach, the romantic viewpoint presents a subtle but key contrast separated by a single letter in the French, so Romanesque versus Romantique. At first glance, a number of factors might make the reader balk at calling Ferrante's Quartet great literature. She chooses to write in the first person and tells as much as she shows the interiority of her central characters. A great many external factors disrupt the story: deaths, murders, kidnappings, yet it is not a story of heroes and villains, where the author wants more than anything for the reader to take the right side. One character and one book inside a book bring out this tension most strongly. So Shakespeare has the play within the play. Ferrante has a lot of books within the book. The character is Pietro Irota, Elena's husband, and he's this brilliant classics professor, but he's portrayed as this remarkably bad lover. If you weren't an academic and were thinking of dating one, if you read their romance, you just never want. So I'll spare you that description of their wedding night intercourse. As a husband and parent, Pietro is aloof and inattentive, leaving Elena overwhelmed in her new role as mother and unable to continue her career. So at first you want to hate Pietro. He's this man who is, even though he's supposed to be this enlightened intellectual, he stunts her intellectual growth. She begins to act out by allowing innocuous flirtations that continue to escalate until she falls for the aforementioned Nino. Elena's desire to leave her husband coincides with a creative frenzy culminating in a feminist manifesto about the invention of women by men. So this is the sort of story within the story, the book within the book. The narrator lets the reader believe that just as women would be better free of men, so too would Elena be better free of Pietro, be free of his famous last name that stamps her identity. If free of these, she would be happier. She would become herself. Since Pietro's politics do not align with the mood of the university, he's basically shunned as a professor, especially during the leftist upsurge of the 1970s. He even suffers an assault at the hands of radicals that hospitalizes him. Despite the pressure to conform to the left and the consequences of failing to do so, he remains undaunted in his convictions. Although his origins are aristocratic, he does not condescend to Elena's poor family when he meets them. Instead, he shows sincere interest in their lives and city. More than any man in the quartet, he treats women as his equals. Both Elena's mother and Lila are disappointed that she would leave him for a man like Nino. Although mostly offstage and symbolic of an older order, Pietro is exalted in the eyes of the most perceptive character, Lila. In a tale of secularization that almost totally ignores the realm of the religious, Pietro, more than anyone, represents a higher religiosity. Lila notes that Pietro speaks as if he were religious, even though he's not a believer. So she's the one with the real insight in the novel. In the context of recalling Elena's first literary effort in high school, when she disagrees with a priest on the meaning of the Holy Spirit, Pietro unleashes a long, seemingly Hegelian interpretation of the Holy Spirit and human community, even referencing a more inclusive notion of sanctification articulated by the prophet Joel. Nino, who has feigned friendship with Pietro only to get closer with Elena while a guest in their home, replies ironically, "I bet there's a priest hiding inside of you." And to Elena, are you his wife? Are you a priest's housekeeper? So he tries to sexually insult him. Rather than responding in kind, Pietro retreats into silence. Just before this episode, he and Elena end up giving refuge to a childhood friend who has resorted to leftist violence. So despite receiving this hospitality, Pasquale, who's his friend, he rudely condescends to their hosts and mock any work not directly aimed at a revolutionary outcome. Pietro says to Elena, someone who talks about intellectual work like that is a fascist, even if he doesn't know it. So in both instances, Pietro relents in conversations to the men who bully him either through insult or sophistry. In the text of the novel, however, Pietro is never redeemed and Elena never really remorseful for how she treats him. The reader, I want to say, must kind of pick through the breadcrumbs here, and this is part of what makes the novels great. There are several books inside the quartet, but the most essential is the aforementioned book on feminism. Here it will be helpful to recall James Joyce's Ulysses, specifically the scene of Shakespearean interpretation. Stephen Dedalus gives a lecture that suggests, I have it up here. So here's the volcano. These are just scenes from Naples, and the Shakespeare is right here. So Dedalus gives a lecture that suggests an autobiographical source for Shakespeare's recurring theme of love triangles. After the lecture, a group of professors mock Stephen's theory. At the culmination of this undressing, John Eglinton asks him, "Do you believe in your own theory?" And this is the title of Gerard's chapter. And Stephen meekly replies, "No," although he later prays for belief. I believe, help my unbelief, right? This phrase is the title given to Gerard's discussion of Shakespeare in the Theater of Envy. One could ask the same of Elena in her theory of women. So do you believe your theory of women? Which further prompts a question of the reliability of Elena as the narrator. Her essay on feminism reflects the morality tale of modern emancipatory secularism, emerging from the fascism of Mussolini, the latest iteration of millennia-long authoritarianism underwritten by oppressive, undemocratic, misogynistic Roman Catholicism. Post-war Italy and the Naples neighborhood march forward into the daylight of enlightened secular values. There was no greater instance of hypocrisy in the Italian church than its valuation of the family, which forbade divorce and exalted the Madonna, but also abetted a culture that scorned, beat, and abused any woman who failed to live up to this ideal. Should not Elena's story be the perfect tale of secular emancipation? The quartet reflects these aging oppressive mores in a number of ways, from detailing the beatings that almost every female character suffers, to relating how Lila comes to be regarded in the neighborhood as a witch whore. That's what the other women call her. To bring the old ways into focus, Verena names the neighborhood parish in the Church of the Holy Family. So this, let's see, or the Italian church here is, I guess I don't have it. This church is coming up, so fret ye not. The only person who attends Mass regularly is the lecherous Donato Saratore, a serial womanizer who sexually assaulted Elena before she turned 15. So he's the only person who actually goes to church. And so, although she begins as a cautious girl, Elena slowly shuns the old sexual norms and does not mind being seen leaving her college boyfriend's dormitory, despite the gossip that inevitably ensues. Although throughout the novels, one feels the male gaze refracted in the main characters, who are not written as sensual or beautiful, but as learning to understand the potency granted in response to this male gaze. Nowhere is the secularizing turn displayed with greater clarity than when Elena opts for a civil marriage with Pietro. Her family recoils at this news, and they berate her relentlessly upon hearing it. They can't possibly fathom her wanting to get married in a courthouse. After this encounter, she confesses, for at least 10 years, the god of childhood, already fairly weak, had been pushed aside like an old, sick person, and I felt no need for the sanctity of marriage. So, religions for children. Instead of marriage understood sacramentally, whereas God gives the grace and forges a sacred bond that no man shall tear asunder, secular marriage underscores the contractual basis of two people freely choosing a partnership. The free human choice eclipses the need for divine grace and communal support. Yet the novel reveals the hubris of this way of thinking about marriage, especially in a culture so freshly liberated from the old norms, which the quartet in no way exalts. So she's not romantic about the way things used to be, but also reveals, well, this new way actually isn't working. So the crumbling of the marriage coincides almost precisely with the narratization of the essay on women. Ferrante describes the early onset of authorial creativity as follows, quote, and so I pushed on in my speculations from the first and second biblical creations to Defoe Flanders, Flaubert Bovary, Tolstoy Karenina, and still further, in a frenzy of revelation, we're almost done here, I discovered everywhere female automatons created by men, end quote. Pietro is too busy to read the manuscript, but Nino the womanizer takes an interest. Although Elena's literary essay argues for female emancipation, so that's what it tells. Ferrante's description of Elena's process portrays someone deeply dependent on male approval. That's what it shows. So you get this tension between the telling and the showing. Elena's desire to finish the essay largely derives from a desire to please Nino. Quote, I did it as if Nino had commissioned that work. On his return, would respect first-rate results, end quote. Reflecting on the Hebrew ish and isha, male, female, Elena concludes that the isha, the woman, is therefore a pure suffix applied to my verbal root. She can express herself only within my word. Later, Elena summarizes the plight of Eve to Nino. Quote, she herself in herself doesn't know what she is. She has pliable features. She doesn't possess her own language. She doesn't even have a spirit or logic of her own. She loses her shape easily, end quote. For Elena, the essayist, Eve is the first woman, misshapen almost literally by man, with help from God, applied from which she must escape in order to achieve full humanity and autonomy. What Elena describes, however, is not the female condition, I want to suggest, but the human condition of dependency and relationality, where one's sense of self is always derived from another. Yet when Nino hears her explain the female plight, he confirms a terrible condition. After leaving her husband, Elena learns that her sister is engaged to a dreaded Solara brother. Instead of respecting her sister's autonomy, you can do what you want, she attempts unsuccessfully for her sister to choose differently. So do what I say. Later, Elena admits, like Stephen Dedalus, that she does not believe in her own theory. In the midst of her affair with Nino, she confesses, although I now wrote about women's autonomy and discussed it everywhere, I didn't know how to live without his body. At least the childhood Elena modeled herself on another female. The adult Elena, purportedly emancipated, finds a male model from whom to gain being. So where she says, I was incapable of being a model for myself. This is a direct quote. Without him, I was a pile of debris, end quote. Freiner's narrator must tell of feminist autonomy in an essay, but does nothing to live this way. So the novels, just to end, they do not quite tell a story of the glories of a religionless secularity. And the men of ideals become people of violence, and the idealist progressive Nino ends up both corrupt and also he ends up actually on the right. And so Lila comes closest to seeing the truth when she notes how everyone's money comes from something dirty. Perhaps the only way to fail to do harm is to will oneself to nothingness, to self-disappear is the main theme. So last paragraph. According to Girard's theory, told with great flair in the first major work, Deceit, Desire, in the novel, the characters in the mature works of the great novelists undergo a type of conversion. This literary conversion represents the real conversion of the novelists. The great novels, thus, are religious, even Christian. Ferrante's quartet ends at the furthest possible point from a conversion. The two childhood friends are estranged from one another. The lack of grace or redemption in the quartet, however, should not mean that we cannot construct what I want to call a Christian reading of the text. It is a fictional world, granted a very realistic simulacrum of the real world, but still a fiction. Unlike two of our European contemporaries who have gained a large American audience, Michelle Houellebecq and Sally Rooney, Ferrante does not hint at or flirt with a conversion. Houellebecq and Rooney, you got this just coming right up to conversion. Yet, a set of novels so relentlessly unromantic about the old, secretly godless ways of living in a functionally post-Christian world, and the new, openly godless way of living in a transparently post-Christian world reveal, at the very least, the need for conversion, even if they don't have one. Thanks.
I was going to point out